Tim Wigmore's Test Cricket, A History is out now. The book tells the story of the players, matches and politics that have shaped the game around the world since 1877. It's the product of 5 years of research that includes interviews with Sachin Tendulkar, Pat Cummins, Michael Holding, Murali and Kane Williamson. Put Wigmore on your shelves today.
Name and job title, please.
Hi, I'm Tim Wigmore, author of Test Cricket, A History. Straight in there.
I would have put it a little bit lower in front of, but you know, it's not like you've written about 93 books and you should know how to do this by now. So I wrote a history on Test cricket and you read that and thought that book is so shit that I am going to write another one, inferior one. I think we all agree on that. So, I mean, we could, you and I, just bounce forever talking about Test cricket, but you did cover some things that I didn't have a lot on, and I did want to talk to you about that. One of the things you covered in quite a lot of detail was the white players from the West Indies, what sort of piqued your interest about that?
Yeah, well, obviously the Frank Worrell's story is the first black captain with tenure, 1960. That's kind of well known. Obviously, I do talk about it a lot in the book, but I was actually thinking about what did it mean to have a white captain before? Like, what does that actually look like? And of course, what it looks like is you're a bit like the amateur situation, of course, in England, but it means you're picking players and then kind of reverse engineering the rest of the team around them. You're also picking players who aren't as good. So West Indies was white. There were some very good white players who played for West Indies, but the dynamics were basically the board wanted generally to have about probably 4 or 5 white players in their team, if at all possible, for the bulk of the time until 1960. And there was basically no good white bowlers, really. There was Dennis Atkinson, but there was pretty much no good white bowlers. And therefore, you have a situation where you probably 3 or 4 of your top 6 will be white batters, including your captain. And this massively weakened the team. So the sort of killer stat, which is really, really damning, is that until 1960, the West Indies white players who bat in their top 6, so the guys in specialist batting roles, have an average of 28, and everyone else who bats in the top 6 has an average of 42 in that time. So you're basically losing 15 runs in innings through doing this policy. And actually, there was a lot of white players who were fully aware that, and actually kind of uncomfortable in some cases with their position. They knew that they were elevated often to captaincy incredibly early in their career, or they just didn't really deserve it just because of the color of their skin. So very interesting dynamic. And actually,
with the batting average as well, like, it makes sense. It's kind of like if you had a cricket team where you picked 4 left-handers and 2 right-handers, right? And based on the fact that you needed 4 left-handers in the side and 2 right-handers. If you just pick the best 2 right-handers, you're probably going to be in a situation where their averages should be really high, because you're not picking. Do you know what I mean? You're literally picking the 2 best guys, or maybe the 3 best guys,
and then on the other side, is
you're doing the opposite
for like half the time, right?
Yeah, it's like George Headley. But even who was the guy he opened with? Like, there were some other decent players in that era, like around him as well. So it wasn't even like, was it Clayton Lambert? Was he one of the other openers? I think they had. No, who's the guy that made the double 100? Early on for Roach, is it something Roach? I can't remember all their names, but they had like that. My point being is, these are probably not ordinary level players. These are really, really highly skilled players playing in that. And as you said, the opposite is also true. And this also, you mentioned before the amateur system of England. It's very similar, right? It's like, there are amateur bowlers when you go through the history of English cricket, but vast majority.
He's got his own gate at Lords, but he's like the one, and he's like kind of like the only one, really. And you have a situation in England where, very similar, you're picking a guy who has to be from the right sort of family, to coin a phrase, and therefore you're kind of you're damaging the whole balance of your team, and you're picking a very weak player, and often, of course, you're also kind of hiding the player, because generally these guys would not open their bat at like 5 or 6, which is the easiest thing batters, from your book, and instead they're averaging not very much. So in the first 10 Ashes tours that MCC run from 1903 to 1951, so that's 50 test matches, and England captains in that have an overall average of 22 with the bat. Top score was 79. And you're like, okay, well, maybe they're bowlers. And actually, they only get 70 wickets in those 50 matches. So just over a wicket a game, which is basically when Gubby Allen is captain, he is that number. But yeah, so there's all these big theories, John Arlett's theory of kind of Australianism, that Australians win because they want it a bit more and so on. But actually, Australia are just better at picking their best.
They're playing an extra player in every game than England is, right? They're literally picking at all 11 players. And to go back to the thing you were just talking about there, and it works for both, because as you said, quite often, whether it be the white captains of the West Indies or the captains from the right kind of families in England, it's further down the order in the middle of in that position, and they don't bowl largely because people who are upper class, people who have privilege, don't bowl as much. Like if you look at the history of cricket,
too much like hard work.
Yeah, why would you want to do that? Like if you at home, if you've got a plantation and you've got black people working on it for you, right? You're not probably in your prime physical condition, right? Like you're not a coal miner, right? Like all the different things that we talk about within sort of old timey cricket, and so you're putting yourself in a position where there aren't any bowlers, and so you're almost doing what American sports does, right? With the NFL, where it's like every position is racially coded.
Yeah, and which actually shows, I guess, one of the causes. It does show like George Headley in a whole, different light even more to be. He would have to have been that much better just to get into the team as a black batter, and then to be as good as he is. With at every turn really the opportunity and just the assumptions that you will be a bowler because of the color of your skin, and so that does put George Headley into his sort of political standing. Shows him up even more. But you have, one of the examples with Jerry Alexander. So he's appointed captain 1958, and at the time of his appointment, he's played 2 tests, and his scores are 0 not out, didn't get out, fair enough, 11, 0 and 0, and they're like, yeah, you're captaining us. Don't worry about Frank Worrell. Yeah, you're now our captain.
And he's nowhere near one of the worst white players. Like Jerry Alexander has a good career.
He does well in the 60-61 tour. He's actually quite a good cricketer, but as he said, he had no right to be appointed. You have Jack Grant. He plays only 12 Test matches in the 30s, and he's captain every single time. Has an average of 25 with the bat. So that's a kind of typical example. And he's also kind of aware. He says, it could not be disputed that my white color was a major factor in me being given this post. So. Yeah,
well, I think if I remember your book right, you said that he didn't even play many first-class games, right? And again, this goes back to the English thing, which is this was very common in England as well, where you have, is it Charles Aubrey Smith captains in South Africa? There's lots of English players who captain in South Africa and versus New Zealand who didn't play a lot of first-class cricket and everything else. But the difference here is that it's like it's classism and racism at the same time. Like you're kind of getting the double whammy.
Yeah, and also we're at a point when the good West Indies players would be playing actually in league cricket in England, so they'd actually be developing their skills off season.
Yep.
And the white players are just not going to be doing that because A, they're probably not good enough. No one wants them, and in many cases, and B, because of their social standing, that it's just not something that they would want to do anyway. So these old dynamics are kind of absolutely.
I didn't even thought about that. That's a really good point because by that stage, by the 1920s, there's quite a few West Indians playing league cricket, aren't there? And that's what Leary wants to do, and all that sort of stuff. And so you're right. It's West Indies have accidentally, as much as anything, basically produced a professional subsection of their cricketers who they then are not picking themselves, right? Like, exactly. Or they're picking the best. I think is it in the where is it? There was one series that you had the numbers here. 1950 tour, they had a squad of 9 white players, 6 black players, and 1 of Indian descent. Like the numbers are not numbering well there, are they? If we considering everything we just said about their batting averages, it's like that feels like and they don't bowl. There's a lot of white guys who don't bat very well and won't bowl.
Yeah, very happy to lots of specialist number 7s really, which is not how you build a good team. Which is and then you have this. And you have to have the captain being white. So what I wanted to, I haven't got to this point yet, but it would be really interesting. You could do as a project, it would be very interesting to do a kind of wins above replacement, and you could probably work out that, you know, the preference for white players cost West Indies, say, 4 or 5 test matches till 1960. That would be, you know, it would be that sort of number, which is quite a lot because they don't win that many, you know, until the 50s. They don't win a lot of test matches at all. And they're weakening themselves effectively on purpose because they'd rather have more white players and have a better team ultimately.
And it's worth, you know, I know, you know, some people will know about this, but it's also worth pointing out that this is not like they're not a normal cricket country because they're not a cricket country, right? So their selection is really random. That's not the only issue they have with selection. So for instance, Frank Worrell is the first permanent black captain, but George Headley does captain for 1 test match. And one of the reasons he only captained for 1 test match is they were rotating it, and each island or each ground or committee, whatever, however you want to put it, got to pick their own captain. So you've already got like all these different countries, all these different conflicting issues going on. You've got this terrible selection committee at home that's doing all sorts of rancid things. Like quite often the West Indies would pick a local player just so they would have a local player in that game, even if they weren't good enough.
Well, all the time. So in their first ever home test series, 1930 versus England, they picked 28 players across the 4 matches. It's like England in the 90s. And they have 4 different captains. So 1 from each island. Of course, all of them are white. So you have captain who was shipped in for a single game. So actually, it's kind of incredible that West Indies are as good as they are until 1960, because they're probably on average picking sort of what equivalent to a sort of a second 11. You know, probably has half of their actual best five or 6 players, and then 5 or 6 who are just there because either the island they're from or the colour of their skin or both. So it's an incredibly bizarre way to pick a team. And actually, just to take the story forward, you know, one of the reasons West Indies get so much better. And we have the sort of the super team that emerges from the 70s is they actually start to pick from the whole region. So 1973 is when they first pick a player from outside the Big Four. So the Big Four, Ghana, Trinidad, Jamaica, Barbados, who you know dominate and still kind of in a way still do dominate Caribbean cricket. But you know, they had all the selectors and they would only pick their own. So when I talked with Andy Roberts, who was the first Antiguan to play Test cricket, obviously a great Test cricketer, but he basically said there was a lot of blokes from Antigua who were better than me who never got a chance in Test cricket. Yeah. So again, if they'd been picking more on merit earlier, and actually one of the themes of the kind of unintentional kind of themes of the book, things that amazed me was how rare it is in Test cricket history that you have a team that literally is the best possible 11 players, and you're like just picking the best 11 players and without worrying about everything else. And again, I think Australia, with you know some big exceptions, Eddie Gilbert and so on, are basically closer to picking their best 11 on average, I think, than. And you're Victorian, so you'll be bitter about.
No, but I mean, when does Western Australia start playing Shield cricket? Western Australia start playing in the 60s, mid 60s. Tasmania start playing in the 80s and 90s. Early 80s. Like, I mean, you could still argue now that Northern Territory, which has produced Test cricketers, probably could produce more if they had, you know, more access. Regional Queensland is probably another place that I think traditionally has had cricketers, but if they don't make it down to Brisbane, they're not playing. You know, there was always the whole thing about Canberra, that if you're a local kid in Canberra, that you really had to go to one of the other cities. And, you know, Nathan Lyons probably made that look more realistic than everyone else. But even within Tasmania, right, like you had the Launceston crew and you had the Hobart crew, right? And that's like a 4-hour drive between the two. So it's really random. No, I think Australia probably did it better than most places. You're right, but it's like
it's definitely not anywhere.
But I think, at least, and there's no way Howard selectors have even seen any of these players, right? Like that's the other thing of like
the other thing, the way a team is actually picked is basically horse trading. It's like, Jared, you want these 2 players, I want these 2 players. There's only like 2 slots. Well, you have 1 pick, I have 1 pick, and maybe the best 2 players were both your guys, but I haven't seen your second guy. And also, I'm from Barbados, and I want to get my guy in the team because part of what I'm judged on is having enough of my guys in the team. Also, I do not want a home Test match without enough of my guys. That's that's embarrassing for me. And so, you end up in just the way teams are picked is completely flawed in so many different ways. And you have to be, so George Headley, of course. And there's a sliding doors moment where he could have gone to become a dentist, and he's lost to Test cricket. And then who knows? And that, I suppose, that Yeah, the average. Yeah, he would have lowered that average for sure had he not been around.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing of I don't think people realize that. Like New Zealand's a perfect example of this, and I don't know if you go into it in the book, but I think you could come up with a pretty good New Zealand 11 for 1936, 1937, right? Of players who wouldn't like. There was a couple of players playing in New Zealand who were good, but most of their best players were playing either in England, and obviously then you also had Clary Grimmett in Australia. So if you brought back the players who were playing county cricket, the players who were playing for Julian Kahn's 11, if you brought back Clary Grimmett, they're probably not that far away from India's level at that point, right?
Absolutely. But you have Stewie Dempster plays 10 tests, average of 65 in the 30s. Then he goes to play for Julian Kahn's 11 and, earning more money. He plays for Leicestershire and he wants to be a professional cricketer, basically, and he can't do that in New Zealand. So New Zealand, they again and again, they're losing players all the time. In fact, it's almost like they go to England. It's almost like it's almost like a trial for some guys to then go and become pros and get at least a league deal, if not with a county, and actually kind of get into the system.
And if you really think about that, that doesn't stop until Kolpak stopped.
No, you have with Glenn Turner, a great example of that in the 70s and early 80s, a huge loss because Test cricket has been terrible at basically at paying players properly, and boards have been. New Zealand was run for a long time in quite a kind of amateur way in the kind of worst sense, very much so.
I mean New Zealand's probably, weirdly enough, New Zealand's probably one of the most pure cricket nations because of that, if that makes sense. And I don't mean it in a good way. I almost mean it in the worst possible way. But they just stayed so amateur, even in the face of obvious professionalism around them. They were like, Glenn Turner's coming back going, guys, I think if we trained and you paid us a little bit of money, we could get better. And they're like, whoa, settle down, big dog. That's not what cricket's like here. And that's as they're getting good, right? Like that's the period at which they're getting good. And they were lucky enough to have enough talented players that didn't go off and do what Glenn Turner did. Because if Hadley, Crowe, and Wright go off and do what Glenn Turner does, we never get a New Zealand boom, right? Like that could have easily happened.
Yeah, and actually, but to go back to the 30s and 40s, actually, West Indies are much more, they are pragmatic at actually dealing it. They'll pick Constantine for only a test or two in England when he's missing games because he's not being released whereas New Zealand have this sort of such a pure approach in terms of we're not going to, but the Constantine reminds me of one of the great stories of shithousery. I think it was a 33 tour West Indies in England and Constantine's playing for Nelson and he's obviously unbelievable for them. And Nelson basically say, we'll release Constantine to play in the last test. He's played one in the series and done well, and he's missed one. If we get this other player, I think Stan Nichols, I think, as a kind of replacement professional. And then Douglas Jardine hears about this and he picks the replacement guy for England to stop Constantine playing against him, which is really terrible, appalling behaviour and very much in keeping with kind of England's later treatment of associate nations and so on.
Yeah. No. It really, I don't think people really understand that full history of how hard it was for a lot of those nations just to overcome the fact that everything pulled into England, right? Like the way that everyone complains about India now, and it's like, we had that for 120 years. It's just that there wasn't a strong enough cricket media, and everyone just saw England as the mother country, and so it allowed it. But then within England, I mean, you talked about this briefly before. What would you say from 1887 to 1952? Every England captain was an amateur, and they made fuck all runs. Right? I'm paraphrasing. I don't know if you use the phrase "fuck all runs."
You're not wrong, and you're paraphrasing.
Yeah, but what's quite interesting is the double standard with all that as well. So we've already talked about that within the West Indies of players who know they shouldn't be captain, leading players who are a lot better. But within England, you have this system where they're called amateurs, right? But they are actually given extra stipends and everything else. So it's not even it's a complete lie. It's just to uphold the sort of the gentleman angle of it. So you're paying someone more to play in a game when you know they're not as good as someone else who you could be paying less. Like it's a bizarre concept. Like I understand classism in England, but fuck me, Wigmore, that's out there.
Jim Latham once gets in real trouble with the old Test and County Cricket Board MCC, because he says, you picked me for an Ashes tour, and he's like, I want to be paid, I'm a good cricketer, I deserve to be paid the most I possibly can. He requests to be an amateur for the tour, and they say, no, you're not the right kind of person to be an amateur, you can only go as a professional. So
I think it would have been great if they said, look, you might be too good as a cricketer to be an amateur at this level. It may be in the 1800s you were good enough to be an amateur, but now we don't have any amateurs like this anymore.
But it's amazing how, the debates about T20 now, they were all foreshadowed then. Because with Leary Constantine, who obviously would have been an incredible T20 player, he writes in his book in 1946, autobiography, he says, we need a rule that Test selection should override every other tie, and we need to do that by paying players properly and stipulating that you will earn more when you play in a Test match, or at least the same as if you're playing a league game. So he has these ideas, and he's also very, on the other thing, he says West Indies will only get better when he says when we stop having white captains, or just because they're white, and also when we start picking from all of the Caribbean, not just the big four. So
I don't know if you came across
better earlier. Yeah.
I don't know if you came across this, and I only came across it really recently, and it was really randomly, which is essentially the Packer family and Don Bradman's relationship goes back way longer than anyone sort of knows. And I think it might have been in a Brettig piece, and then I was doing some other research. And
I read his book. Yeah.
Yeah, and I sort of two and two came together. And it's like Bradman almost didn't play for Australia because of a sponsorship deal, right?
Before
how different would we look at cricket right now if in the middle of his career Bradman disappeared? And if you think about it, if Bradman was the greatest Australian male athlete of that era, the next greatest athlete was a guy called Rod Laver, right, who won 2 Grand Slams 10 years apart. Why didn't he win more Grand Slams, Wigmore? Because he went off to play professional tennis, and his record is almost irrelevant in that period. And so Bradman could have done a similar thing. And so it was really it was not, I wouldn't say through dumb luck, but because again they bent over backwards, and Bradman did end up making a lot of money out of cricket, right? And did make, was set up with the stockbrokers and all these different things that maybe he shouldn't have got. Why not just pay the guys? You're actually finding ways to pay them without paying them. It's such a bizarre system that it was just but in their heads they were like, it's a bit like now when you say to people, oh, if we're going to have injury substitutions, we have to have substitutions. And they're like, whoa, no, we can't do that. And it's like, we only don't have substitutions by accident, right? Like every other sport kind of did it, and we just forgot. And now we're in this thing where we're like, it's actually part of the game to not have substitutions. And it's like, yeah, but then don't moan when one team is a bowler short and they've only got a 3-man attack. So it really is weird that there was never that conversation within cricket to be like, actually, this makes more sense.
Of course, but if Bradman had gone, that probably would have been the moan, because cricket is run by Australia and England at this time until 1993. Actually, they have defeated incredibly.
You say that, but don't you think that maybe Grace is the wrong one, but Barnes and Grace both don't play for England as much as they should, because they can make more money outside, don't they? It didn't. Maybe you're right. Bradman probably would have been the breaking point for cricket, in which they would have had to take this more seriously. But they didn't for Barnes. In fact, they went the other way with Barnes, right? They literally said with Barnes, oh, fuck off and play your club cricket. And then occasionally they'll be like, actually, we want to win this Test series. Are you still free?
Yeah, I mean, Australia in 1921 lose Ted McDonald, who's one of their, with Jack Gregory, part of their great fast bowling pair. Probably actually the first great fast bowling pair in terms of actually being fast that we've seen in Test cricket. He leaves to go and play in Lancashire as well. So there are examples before, but Bradman was such a star. I suspect there would have, that might have been a catalyst for people to play their players more. I don't know. It's but given the way cricket's run, it's funny. There was an irony as well with Bradman, that he's then kind of lecturing players on his disgust of them going to World Series cricket, and you're like, hang on a moment, you almost signed with Accrington, you kind of did, and then you pulled out because this kind of weird consortium of people came up to offer you more. I mean,
it's really interesting, all that sort of stuff.
I'll just finish. Because Malcolm Knox, he has this great. He works out that Australian players in the 1890s actually earn more in real terms than Australian players for basically a century on. So that's completely right in terms of, it shows how underpaid they are for a long, long time afterwards, which creates which is where everything comes from. It's where World Series cricket comes from, really the rebel tours as well. They all kind of come from this central problem.
I have travelled the cricketing world, and so I've collected two things: the phone numbers of random taxi drivers and overseas SIM cards. Rideshare apps have fixed the first part, and Sally is doing the second. Now, all you need is their eSIM on whatever plan works for you. You activate it and you can use it anywhere in the cricketing world. It helps you save money. It is a global solution to a global problem. Stop fiddling with tiny SIMs and get the one that does it all. Go to Sally.com Good Areas and use the code Good Areas to get an exclusive 15% off your first purchase. Fly free with Sally.
There's a great line during World Series cricket, and I forget the name of the guy, but he wasn't a particularly high up person in Cricket Australia, but like let's say he was a vice president or a treasurer or something. And he was just like, if they don't want to play, that's fine. There's 3 million other guys who want to play. And it's like, yeah, like I get your general point, but if you took the best 15 out of any sport, are you still expecting to win? And isn't that what it is? And it wasn't, right? Like I don't think there's a cricket nation on earth, as you said before, forget the vagaries of selection, because okay, some of it was tough and geographical issues, and as you said, if you're from Victoria, if you're the selector from Victoria, you're not going to last as a selector from Victoria if you're not picking Victorians. Like all those things do play a part. Don't get me wrong, but just the fact that there was never what I would call a unified push to be like, can we get the best 11 players on the field at this stage? To the point, to go back to Australia again, because I do think Australia is quite fascinating in this. You have that sort of Bob Simpson, is it Bob Cowper as well? The Bobs? Maybe I'm just mixing them up. But Simpson and Cowper both retire at 28 and 30. Ian Chappell retires 30, 31, I want to say, as well.
Greg Chappell misses some tours, including the 81 Ashes.
Yeah. I mean, some of that, no. But Australia has a history of guys retiring between 28 and 31, right? And everyone knows what it is, right? Bumble talked to me about it recently. He's like, that period where everyone was retiring because they made more money working in the city than they would playing cricket. It's like, I was brought up knowing those stories, right? At no stage did anyone go, do you know what? I would think the Australian team might be better if Bob Simpson plays till he's 33 rather than retiring in the middle of his peak. Like, it's a really, like, if you think about Bob Simpson as a cricketer, he can bat. He's a very good fifth bowler, and he's one of the best slip fielders in the world. Even if he got shit, right, and I think he was averaging 40 odd, right? If it comes down to like low 40s or high 30s, you've still got someone who can bowl really good leg spin and fielding. And it's like, how many good players do you need to lose at a young age before you start to go to yourself, I don't know if the math is mathing here, guys. Surely we should be doing something. And it just never occurs to cricket all the way through, does it?
No, because the people who run it, they're just bumbling through and they see it as a bit of a... Well, I think they're so obsessed with basically status and, advancing the establishment as they see that they kind of like it the way it is, to be honest. It's like they don't really want things to change. Even with Peter May in England is another great example. A fantastic player, retires as age 30. And surely had another 5. I think he was probably quite close to your top 50. Well, maybe he was in.
He would have been in my top 50, I think, if he played a little bit more. No, he struggled away from home. I love Peter May though. So but you're right.
But yeah, he retires so early, and then goes and earns lots in the city. But it's like this is not the way to grow the game, by letting the best players go early. And then, of course, you're both doing that, and you're kind of ostracizing the ones who are like, actually, I want to be a professional cricketer, but the way I can do that is playing in Lancashire League and stuff. You're then kind of banning them as well. So it's completely self-defeating on different levels.
One of the other things I was fascinated in your book was, I want to get his name right here. In 1951-52, Nigel Howard, who I must admit, I knew the name, but I didn't know much about. Nigel Howard was named captain for a full tour. He had a batting average of 17.2. Not a lot of test captains.
His first class average was 23, right? And he's picked as a specialist batsman.
Hey, it's ridiculous.
You thought Zach Crawley was lucky to get all his test matches.
Zach Crawley sitting there going, what about Nigel Howard, everyone? Why are you slagging me off? How much of that is just because he's an amateur and they've run out of amateurs, I suppose? I don't understand.
It's completely because he's an amateur and he's the right... And because most players have been on the good players have been on the Ashes Tour the previous year, and they don't fancy going on another one.
Yeah.
And England, of course, have this weird thing. It's very English in this era, where unless it's an Ashes tour, if it's away from home and they lose, it doesn't really count. Remember, so they will go to West Indies and lose and say, but we haven't picked our best team, so it doesn't really matter. So they have this weird approach as well. So they're kind of losing matches, but they're pretending it doesn't matter. And really, until Len Hutton becomes captain, that's probably the turning point, releasing England taking all tests seriously. But even like until the 50s, England would just pay players more for Ashes tests than non-Ashes tests, right? And so it's just, again, it kind of feeds into English cricket psyche. But there was this such a so they were just picking the right sort of person to be captain, and they probably just thought he was a good bloke and he deserved to be captain of England for a tour.
It's funny because like we make fun of you might remember him, the Nigel Bennett who becomes Surrey's captain by accident after World War II. Like you make fun of that because he wasn't. It's like he didn't average that much less than Nigel Howard did for England, right? Like I'm sure Nigel Howard was a slightly better cricketer than him, but not that much different.
No, and even when Len Hutton becomes captain, he still calls Freddie Brown, who's the kind of previous amateur captain, he still calls him skipper. So he's still it's like so ingrained. And Hutton is interesting because he obviously breaks the divide, but it's almost he's quite a conservative figure as well. So he is sort of almost probably who the establishment. I guess if the establishment had to have anyone to break the divide, they would choose a guy such as Len Hutton, basically, because he fits in. You know, he's very kind of. He observes the sort of social niceties, so he's not really. Even though he
wasn't rocking the boat,
he's the first guy really to be
properly
captain completely on merit. He still kind of fits in with the old view.
Yeah, because there are other professionals who could have been captain before then that probably would have been more upsetting to the actual establishment, right? And you can understand that. There's another great stat from your book which I really really like, which is. Between 1948 and 1966, 8 out of 10 England captains came from Oxford or Cambridge. But that's good. From 1930 to 1977, 15 out of 28 came from there. And I'm a little bit disappointed in my wife, who studied at both of those universities and somehow still didn't manage to captain a side. But it really shows you how. I remember having this conversation with someone who was very much from one of those kinds of families, Wigmore, that we're talking about here. And we were talking about Shane Warne. He goes, well, obviously Shane Warne's a genius. And I went, really? And he goes, well, if he went to a really good school, I'm sure he would have got really good marks. And I went, he went to one of the best schools in Melbourne and he was still fucking shit at school. Like, he is a genius, but he's not, like, your idea that he's intellectual and academic is completely wrong. I think if Shane Warne ever proved anything to us, that was not his way. And you could argue that with Ben Stokes and I don't know, maybe some other captains who are very venerated. They're brilliant at reading the game. They're not particularly good. You wouldn't want them doing your taxes or anything, right? Like you wouldn't want them representing you in court, like for fuck's sake, right? So there is a different angle, I think, on that. And there's no doubt that England, after sort of relaxing themselves on the class thing, they replaced class with this education thing of, well, if he can read books and he was a, I'm going to say Cambridge Blue. Does that sound right? Or is it Oxford Blue? One of the Blues anyway. He was a good cricketer there. And it's like, there's a real element of once you become a Cambridge or Oxford cricketer and a good first-class cricketer, you're a very good chance of just captaining your country, which is such a bizarre thing to say.
Yeah, and this is the Brian Close thing, really, where people look at his career now and they're like, how did he play so little for England? If he was good enough to play age 18 and age 46, why is he only playing, what did he play, 25 tests or something? Yeah, so why is he playing?
Many, was it?
Yeah, why is he? Yeah, and he's a great captain for Yorkshire, and it seems to fit in with that. And so even after Hutton, they can kind of go back and they do pick people who, like Peter, even if they're not officially amateur, they still fit in with their kind of as close as you can be to amateurs without being amateurs.
It's a class thing, isn't it? It's a like
Smith, yeah.
Don't you think that like there's the class element there? They're just replacing the status, which is moving in English society anyway, right? So instead of picking someone who is naturally from that class, you're now picking someone who is educated like someone of that class.
Well, yeah, you're picking people who would have been amateurs a generation earlier, basically.
Yeah.
And so you are kind of self-replicating. And interestingly, because there is an element of this elsewhere as well. So with Pakistan, they have Abdul Qadir, Javed Burki, Majid Khan, and Imran Khan, who all go to Oxford or Cambridge. And with Javed Miandad, who we know likes to pick a fight, but he's not wrong in picking this fight when he says, in Pakistan, there's a real thing where we obsessed with people who went to Oxford or Cambridge. We're also obsessed with actually just being able to speak English. And it's like, why does that matter? Why is that relevant? So this does, and I think in terms of who organises tours, right? And when you're thinking of a tour to West Indies or a tour to England or whatever, I think the people who organise those tours, they are thinking about the cocktail parties. They're thinking about who they want to speak.
I was going to say that.
Speak at, and this is with Fred Truman as well. This is what they say, because Fred Truman plays 20 test matches away from home, which is incredible. And seemingly he behaves kind of badly in West Indies in 53-4, and then England think he's not the sort of guy that you want at the ambassador's party and stuff. So this has a real impact on again who's picked in the team, because a cricket tour is not just a cricket tour, right? A cricket tour is a political event, and it's about how you want to represent your country in that. And so every country really is thinking about this, and I think Australia are thinking about it probably like least, which is a factor.
Yeah, I think Australia probably gets lucky as well, though, don't they? Because Ponsford and Bradman, trying to think of some of the others that follow, and Benno probably are the right kind of people.
They are, but Australia has a thing where every player is basically a semi-professional until the 80s.
Yeah,
so you don't have to think so and so can't be captain because he's a professional. So I think that just makes it a lot easier. And
no, exactly. But if imagine that Ponsford was not like Ponsford, or Bradman was not like Bradman, right? Like there might be an element of where you have to fix it, and maybe they didn't have to fix it as much as they would have in other places. But you're right. I mean, there's no doubt that Australia is the outlier in almost any way you look at international cricket. Like most of the other places, you have a sort of a school system or a class system, or as you say, in some places, an English system of like if you speak English correctly or whatever that may be. And Australia just doesn't really fit in. Like Warwick Armstrong is like, a completely different kind of character to what the sort of captains that you would probably normally be looking at from other countries. People come from all varied kinds of backgrounds in Australia. There are other problems within Australian cricket. There's a Catholic Protestant issue at one stage. And, as we said before, there's a little bit of the lack of professionalism, but it is different. And then you go to like even a country like Sri Lanka, which doesn't play Test cricket until the 80s, and yet is still dominated by like two schools, right? Like you still have that sort of old English thinking there. And, remember when Eton versus Harrow was going to be cancelled and the Lords members got really upset? What's the biggest cricket game in Sri Lanka every year, right? It's between, was it Trini and Royals or whatever? I don't even know.
You get 10,000 people and it swamps a crowd of a test match in the same city at the same time.
So it's the same thing over and over again. And a lot of that is it's the colonial hangover, right? Like it has to be. Like there's no other way of looking at a lot of this, is there?
Yeah, I think the only thing we haven't with the captaincy that's worth mentioning is the batting v bowling thing. So there's and this is linked to class, but it's basically you have a situation where your captain has to be a batsman, and by having that is where you're going to get. So actually having Richie Benno as captain is actually quite significant. Again, would Benno? I don't know. Maybe he would have been appointed in at the same time. Railing was appointed not that long after, I suppose, for England. But it does that's part of this equation as well. So if you're saying it has to be a batter in the top six, really, then that and we're only picking our batsmen from a certain group, then of course no wonder who your captain's going to be from a certain background, because you haven't really given anyone else a chance.
And that's also, it's self-fulfilling, but it's also not by accident, right? Like the reason that they said that batters had to be captain is because there's no real reason. And in fact, I think Australia have a bowling captain. Is it George Giffen from South Australia? Might be a bowling captain in the late 1800s. I can't remember when he played. So there had been, like, it wasn't like no one had ever picked a bowling captain before, but there was this general feeling that you couldn't do it. But when you go back and you have a look at who the batters were, especially if you go back all the way to late 1700s, early 1800s, before overarm bowling comes in, at that stage, the best batters are quite often older guys with big, heavy bats and the ball's rolling along the ground. And so it's like a 55-year-old who's probably also the Treasury Secretary of Lords, right? And so, of course, they're going to say that batters have to be captain.
But even in the 1890s, so Jim Phillips, who's sort of like the first sort of super umpire of his day, so he umpires a lot of Ashes tests, and he says there's this huge difference in how the England captain talks to his team and the Australian captain talks to his team. He basically says the England captain is a kind of an autocrat. He doesn't listen. He doesn't listen to people, and the Australian captain is actually happy to consult everybody, and also he's happy to consult bowlers, because if the English captain was consulting anyone, he was consulting his friends who were the batters from the same sort of background, everything. So again, Australia a little bit able to actually kind of access the whole cricket knowledge of their whole team, rather than just say, we guys know your job is just to bowl and don't think about it, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Give me three more bits of the book that just sell the book here with your classic Wigmoreisms.
So talk to tons of great players. I could work for a great 11, but including talking to Sachin. And one of the fascinating things talking to Sachin is in his first 44 tests away from home, India only win a single one. So 1 out of 44. So it's incredible actually to reflect how bad India were for so long. So that was a great one to do.
And what did he say? Did he say, stop asking me negative questions? What's wrong with you?
No, he did sort of talk about the kind of weird thing where he would do everything right. Because obviously this is the 90s when he's actually probably Sachin's peak, actually.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so there's story in Barbados in 1997 when India need 120 to win. They're 2 for none overnight. Tendulkar goes to a restaurant on the cliffs in Barbados, and he goes to the waiter, champagne, and he says, can you chill that? The best bottle of champagne, can you chill that? I'll be back here tomorrow to drink it. Tendulkar gets out cheaply the next day. India bowled out for 81. Very traumatic defeat, and he stays locked in his room for 2 days afterwards. Which is a sad story, although he had plenty of good stuff in his career as well. But that was I guess it shows how brutal Test cricket is, and also I guess the extent to which you're not just fighting the team, you're also fighting history, and it becomes hard to win a West Indies because every other team who's gone before you hasn't done either.
Okay, what else you got?
Oh wow, I've got so much. I will talk about so why West Indies get good, I think, is we talk about the great players in that era, but also they're picking from their whole talent pool. They have these proper professional players, so they have tons of overseas players in club cricket, in league cricket. You have World Series cricket, and you have impact of team fitness, team psychologists, and so on. So the kind of professionals of that West Indies team, and kind of deconstructing. I mean, the talent there was incredible, but the whole point was they were actually able to make the very best of their talent in a way they probably hadn't been before. And actually, so that was really interesting to look at as well, with a sort of with fresh eyes. And I suppose to go back to so many little things, but as you'd expect. But so he's looking at Victor Trumper. One of the great sort of stats that you kind of think about what he'd have been like to see, and the great stat which I think does convey that what it'd be like as a fan is he scores faster per hour than any player in history, and he still has that record because of course over rates are so much faster then. But it's like if you're going to a game, you're not thinking he's 40 or 54 balls. You're going, he's got 40 in 40 minutes. That's really, really quick. And so in terms of what it'd be like as a spectator, that I think that does give a bit of a sense of the kind of the magic of him. What was he, number 40 in your list?
42 is he? He's around there. Yeah, he's around 40. You're right. I mean, he's remarkable, isn't he? It's like I love the fact that no one catches up to him really till Viv Richards. Like he's such an outlier. It's like we can't do it. No one else can work it out. And it wasn't just him. I don't know if you looked at the stats, but Clem Hill, who was batting with him, was also really quick. And you're just and no one even writes about Clem Hill being quick.
A left-handed bumper who averages 3 runs less.
It's ridiculous, and he's just completely ignored. Probably the first great left-hander as well. So no, I definitely think that's a great one. There's actually that period of cricket is, I think it is one of the, it's a shame there weren't more teams playing, but it is a fascinating period.
That's
because
the thing we talk about this. It's a kind of, I call it the golden era or cricket's missed opportunity, and of course the golden age or cricket's missed opportunity, and of course it's both, because it is an incredible era. You know, Ranji and Trumper and everyone who are bringing the game forward, Sidney Barnes and so, but you also have the great missed opportunity, because that's when the ICC is formed, 1909, and the key word there is imperial, and that excludes Argentina and USA, which would have made for some very fun away tours, and you have a whole different game. And that's, I guess, that was a frustration writing the book. There were chances again and again there were kind of doors that weren't open to really expand the game. We could have, almost every nation that's got test status could have got it a few years earlier, and this happens again and again.
Just throwing it out there, we didn't need to call it test status, but
that's
maybe that's more for me and Rod to have another episode on that in the future. Wigmore, your book is called
Test Cricket: A History. 5 years in the making. Talked to over 40 of the best players of all time, and I think bibliography is 18 pages long. So this took a long time. Lots of research.
It's a big book. I can say that
it's a narrative history full of stories and characters. And if you like cricket, if you listen to this podcast, therefore you like cricket, and therefore you'll enjoy the book.
It's about 1.5 centimeters smaller than Bob Wilmer's book, just so you're aware. But I think he's got a lot more photos.
Simon Wilde weighed my book. He said it was 850 grams, but he said Steve Waugh's was 1.8 kilos. So it's half of Steve Waugh's book.
Don't get me started on the fact that when Australian captains used to retire, they used to think they were like Churchill or Roosevelt.
Yeah.
And they would release these ridiculous books, and you just like the Ponting one. I think I still have it somewhere. Peter Lawler writes the start of it, right? And it's, I don't know, maybe 80 pages, and you're like, this is really good. I didn't know a lot about young Ricky Ponting, and it moves quite engagingly and everything. And then it just feels like it is player diaries from then.
Yeah.
And it's just like they might as well have just stuck all the player diaries together at the end, right? I could be wrong in this, but I'm pretty sure there is a bit in the 10,000 page opus of Ricky Ponting where it's like, today went to the gym, didn't feel like much more. I might have made that up, Wigmore, but that's how it felt reading.
The old cricket playbooks are so small. Like Leary Constantine's book is like 120 pages. Jack Hobbs as well, and it's like, they're not messing around. But the modern ones.
I think Fred Spothif's is about 20 pages or something. Like it was just like it's barely a book. Like it's incredible. My favorite cricket book moment of all time is Stuart Broad's Ashes 2009 book. Which he's run out of things to say about this series. And so in the middle of it, he talks about every single player. And of course, he has quite strong opinions on a lot of the players. Then he gets to Graham Manu, right? And he's got about a paragraph and a half. And then he goes, he only played one test, don't know much about him. And it's just blank. That's it. It's just Graham Manu's name, 2 paragraphs and blank. Think he's a good wicket keeper. Don't know much about him. But your book is certainly more detailed than that. I mean, I don't know if anyone's ever said this about you. I think you might be a better writer than Stuart Broad. I'm just putting it out there. I don't want to be controversial. I know he's got a book out as well, doesn't he? Or was that last year?
He's always got a book out, I think.
He's had a lot of books out. All right, Wigmore, thank you very much for coming on the podcast, and I'll see you again next time.
Thank you very much.
Tim Wigmore's Test Cricket: A History is out now. The book tells the story of the players, matches, and politics that have shaped the game around the world since 1877. It's the product of 5 years of research that includes interviews with Sachin Tendulkar, Pat Cummins, Michael Holding, Murali, and Kane Williamson. Put Wigmore on your shelves today.